Potomac Beads. Join me in making these nice Stormy Rose earrings featuring a 14mm Rivoli as well as our StormDuo beads. Remember, if you need any supplies, check the description below to get links to shop with us online at PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu. So to begin, we are going to bezel our 14mm Rivoli. The 14mm Rivoli that I'm using is the Potomac Crystal Rose Gold Patina. So it has that nice foil backing and then that kind of spider web of patina along the top. Gives off a copper hue, and that's why I'm going to be using the StormDuos in the vintage copper. You will need 6 of them per earring, or 1 if you're doing it as a pendant. This is going to be right about an inch when you're looking at it from end to end, depending on the size. I have some Delicas here because I will be bezeling and making a nice simple bezel. We also have a YouTube video on that if you need more help with the bezel. To start out with the 14mm Rivoli, I have my Delicas in the Duracoat Opaque Guava, and I have 36 of them on some .006 wildfire beading thread, and I'm using the green color. Now, if I was doing this as my own project, I would be using white, but I am using the green color so that way you can see it. Once you count and double count that you have 36 on your thread, and I'm using a size 12 needle, you're going to tie this into a knot. Right over left, left over right. Make sure no beads are mixed in to that knot, and then give a nice tight pull. Sometimes for that first loop, you need to pull with a pair of pliers that helps to get that knot tight. From here, I want to get my thread and needle away from the knot. So I'm going to sew up through approximately 4 seed beads. Once I come out here, I'm going to do a row of peyote stitch. For peyote stitch, if you don't know it, again, there are a simple set of bezeled earrings that you can check out, but you're going to add 1 more bead in the Delica. You're going to skip a bead and sew through the next one in line from that starter row of 36. I'll be adding 18 in this second row of my peyote, adding a bead, skipping the next one in line after the thread, and going through the next one after that. We're going to continue around, again adding 18, so if you want to, you can make a pile of 18 seed beads. Going around, you'll start to notice kind of that brick wall where you have 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. After adding 18 beads, we'll come back together and I'll show you how to do a step up so we can start adding beads to bezel in the back of the Rivoli. Once you go around and do your peyote ring, you'll notice again that you have that 2-1 pattern. When you're adding that last or 18th and final Delica bead, what you want to do is give a nice tight pull, sew through that first bead that your thread was originally coming out of, and then do what's called a step up. You're going to go into the first of those 18 beads that you just added in this row of peyote. Not to confuse you, but even though it just seemed like the second row, the first row was actually 2 at once, and we just completed our 3rd row of peyote. From here, we're going to start adding some 15-0s, and I'm using the Miyuki seed bead in 15-0 in Duracoat Galvanized Gold. Again, if you know peyote, very simple. Add a bead, sew through a bead. What we're going to be doing is adding 18 of our 15-0 seed beads, and as we add those 18, you add 1 and sew through those 18 Delica beads in the guava that are already sticking up. I have 4 on, 14 more to go, and then we'll add a second layer of our 15-0 seed beads to really encapsulate and kind of hold in the back. So once you're adding your 18th and final 15-0, I want you to go through that first Delica bead that your thread was originally coming out of, as well as do that step up again through that first 15-0 that you just put on. You'll notice at this point that the Delica beads are smaller, or the 15-0 seed beads are smaller than the Delicas. Because of that, you're going to start to get this netting effect. That's what we want, where it starts to kind of cage in and close. I'm going to go around now that I've done that step up of that peyote and do 1 more collection of my 15-0s. Then we're going to set our Rivoli in place. So again, adding 18 more 15s, this time adding a 15 and sewing through that 15-0 seed bead that is already in place, giving a nice kind of pull on the thread, not on the needle because you don't want to damage that area of the thread. Pull on the thread and go around adding in your 18 new beads. Once you have your 18 new 15-0s on, this really creates that back bezel to hold in the 14mm Rivoli. If you don't want to do anything else from here, you can keep it really simple, but this at least gave you that idea of how to stitch the back. From here, I want to take my thread and needle after going through that first 15 on that first row. In order to add our second row of 15s, we're going to bring our thread and needle towards the front of the project. This is really simple when you're doing peyote stitch because you just follow right along a diagonal and right along the beads in a line. So I just hook a diagonal up right along the side beads till I'm out towards the front. At this point, you can see that nice little bezel that's created. This will fit a 14mm Rivoli perfectly. You do want to check after and before the 14-0 or before the 15-0 second round, just in case you have an off brand of crystal. It may be cut a little bit different, but if it says 14, it should be 14. So, all right, so I'm going to go in here and add in a 15 in between each one of now my front of my Delica beads. So I have my front 15-0 now, and you can hold your Rivoli in there, you can put the Rivoli down. As I get to the front and bezel around the front, I like to hold the Rivoli as I'm working on it. So now I have 18 more 15 OC beads to add on my first round of my bezel along the front. And then when we do our second row, I'm going to show you how to skip and get that nice scalloped look to just add a seed bead for every other peyote stitch. Once you go around that first row, again, you have 18 in, and as you're adding them, you kind of want to pull towards the center of the crystal with your thread. That's going to pull those 15s in towards the middle of the crystal so they stay. What I'm going to do for my second round, instead of adding a 15 for every 15 that is missing, I'm going to add 9 total. This gets a little bit of that scalloped look in the middle. I have my first 15 that I'm coming out through my 15 OC bead that I added first on this first round of 15s, and I'm going to go through the second one just like I would regular peyote. Instead, again, pushing down, kind of pulling it in towards the center so that Rivoli stays equal in the middle. Instead of adding another 15-0 right away, I'm going to sew down through my Delica right below that bead, and then up on an angle through the 15-0 that sits above that. Again, pull down towards the middle, add a 15, sew through the next 15 in line like I'm doing regular peyote stitch. It's also how you do some downgrading of peyote. Go through the 15-0 or the 11-0 below it, the Delica, as well as the 15-0. So this will end up basically every other space you're adding a 15-0 seed bead, and what that's going to do is add 9 into your count. So I have 3 on, 6 more to go, and then we get to have the fun of starting to actually design and adding our storm to the outside of our Rivoli. Once you add your final 15 OC bead, you're coming out of one of the first 15s that were on the piece. I'm going to sew on the diagonal back one of my Delicas, then back another Delica. You can see I'm going on the angle. And then I'm going to sew back to my backmost row of Delicas. So I kind of have 3 rows of Delicas. 1, and then my middle row, and then a third row to the back. Coming out the back, I'm going to add my StormDuos. When I pick up the StormDuos, I want to pick them up with the rounded side to the bottom, the open side to the top. Picking them up, I'm going to use a 15, pick up my StormDuo, 15, and then I'm adding a light rose, 1.5 by 2mm rondelle, followed by another 15. Come back down the StormDuo, give a nice tight pull so it goes right down in the project, add a 15-0 after, and what we're going to do is skip over to the 4th bead basically in the row. You're coming out of 1 bead, you're going to skip the 2nd, the 3rd, and sew into the 4th and out. Give a nice tight pull, and that puts that StormDuo, the first one, right on there. At any point you can go in and do this as well with SuperDuo, with other beads, and kind of try out, just change up the design a little bit. So again, I put on a 15-0, go through the chunky side of my StormDuo bead, add a 15, then a crystal, then a 15, sew down through the StormDuo. Remember, I'm just focusing and keeping to the backmost row of my Delicas, and I'm going to After coming out of bead 1, skip bead 2, skip bead 3, sew through bead 4. What this is going to do is get me enough space and an exact count to do 6 of my StormDuo beads. And I want to make sure I kind of push them towards the front. Oh, forgot my 15 there. So I'm just going to sew out that bead. Make sure you have a 15 before and after the StormDuo, just so it sits nicely along that outer edge. Adding in my 15-0, and again counting over 1, 2, and going into that 4th bead in the row. Continue on adding in 4 more of your SuperDuo beads in that same exact fashion. When you get your last SuperDuo in place, you're going to be coming out through that first bead that your thread was coming out of when you added your first SuperDuo. What I want to do now is move to the 2nd row of C beads. So I'm going to sew on a diagonal right in there. Do that 2nd row of C beads, and you can see how pretty it is even just on its own right now without kind of going the extra mile and adding more C beads and more crystals. What I want to do is I want to sew out through basically the middle Delica in that 2nd row that sits below the StormDuo. So I'm going to sew back through here along the peyote stitch and make sure that I'm coming out through that middle Delica bead. When I come out through the middle Delica bead, then I'm going to go around in a circle and add in some more crystals. So my thread and needle want to go out through the front. I just want to go through 2 beads and pop that out. Sometimes the needle will cooperate, sometimes you have to go 1 bead at a time, which is what I'm going to do, rather than trying to go through 2 at once. There, I'm down through the side, and now I'll be out exactly where I want to be. So where I want to be, again, is that 2nd bead, basically, or the bead right underneath that little curvature of the StormDuo. When I'm coming out there, I'm going to add a collection of 5 beads. Those 5 beads are going to include a 15, a Delica, a crystal, a Delica, and a 15. So going from smallest bead to biggest bead, you're going to add those onto your needle. Just like we were doing, skip over 4 beads, which is going to bring you again through that kind of middle bead that sits right below that next StormDuo. Sew through just that bead and out. When you pull that down, that decorates just right there in the middle. Again, 15 Delica crystal, Delica, 15, over to the next StormDuo, or count 4 if you need to, and stay to that center row of Delicas and go through just that 1 Delica bead right after the StormDuo. I'm going to continue on now, adding 4 more of those to pop a crystal in between each one of my StormDuo beads. As I get my last crystal in place, I'm going through that first Delica bead that my thread was coming out of, giving a nice tight pull. You sit it down here, you can see those 6 beads sit perfectly between those 6 StormDuos. And what I'm going to do is make the StormDuos sit and cooperate a little bit. Right now they kind of can push to the back, and we are going to solve that issue. What I'm going to do is bend that first one to the back, just so I can get my needle along the back, coming out through my StormDuo. So I'm going to go up through the StormDuo, through my crystal seed bead, crystal, down through the seed bead, down through the StormDuos. And again, I'm turning them to the side just so my thread and needle can go and cooperate where I need it to go. Then as I bring it back to the front, I'm going to connect a 15-0 seed bead with the crystal that sits in that space between. Push it to the back because you want it to sit a little bit to the back. Add another 15, bend the next StormDuo back, go through, and make sure again that it sits kind of towards the back there. Go through the crystal and the seed beads, down the StormDuo, out the StormDuo, just the StormDuo, and not through the 15 below it because you're adding a new 15 in, grabbing onto that crystal, pushing that seed bead kind of towards the back, adding another seed bead, going up through that next StormDuo bead and through the beads at the top. So you're going to end up adding in 12 more 15-0s, and this is going to hold those StormDuos in place along the piece. The last thing we do after that is we're going to go in and connect and add a little bit more of that stormy pink to it and adding the 15s in place. As you're coming out of your last Storm Duo, adding in those 15s, I want you to sew up through the 15 OC bead through the crystal, and you can certainly keep it nice and empty like that if you want, but I am going to add a little bit more pop of color and connect the crystals on the outside. Going through the crystal 15 and coming out that last 15, we're going to add a rotation of 2 15s followed by 3 Delicas. If you want another crystal pop on the outside, just omit 1 15 and 1 Delica from the middle in your count and add the crystal in there, and then 2 more 15s along the edge. I tried it with both and I really like just the seed beads again to get some of that pink towards the outer edge. Go through the 15 crystal 15 at the next Storm Duo, and then continue the whole way around this circle, adding in the 15s and the Delicas around till we're coming out through that first crystal, which we're going to add our ear wire or our wire guard to, depending on how you want to attach them to your actual finding. The last and final time you're putting on your seed beads, again, I want you to come out through that first crystal that your thread was originally coming out of. So you're sewing through the 15 and the crystal. When you come out through this crystal, I would recommend a wire guard. You're going to sew up through the wire guard, down through the wire guard on the other side. And if you need to open up that wire guard a little bit, you can usually just do so very simply with your fingers. It's a soft metal. Just open it up just the tiniest little bit. Trying not to kind of pinch down that tube on the side at all, or that channel. Go through then the other side and go through the crystal. You want to do that once, and then you want to do it a second time as well. Whenever you are doing your connection point, where you're putting on a clasp, a closure, an ear wire, you always want to make sure you have 2 threads going through to stabilize and reinforce that area, since that's generally the area that gets the most kind of wear, tear, and action towards it. I'm going to go down through the 11-0, or through the crystal on the other side, and down through the 15-0 below it. Give a nice tight pull, making sure your thread stays in that wire guard. Down through the Storm Duo below. Kind of turn it to the side so your needle comes out the back. All you're going to do then to finish up these Stormy Rose earrings is just go in, weave the thread around the back. You can tie it on if you want, but as long as you go through a couple rows of the peyote and backtrack it, it's going to stay nice and tight, and then just burn down the edge of your thread to finish up your beautiful little springy rose colored set. Thanks so much for joining me in making these Stormy Rose earrings. Remember, if you need a little bit more help with that peyote stitch, you can also check out the simple Rivoli bezel with the blue earrings. We'll put a link to that down below the description. Also in the description, remember that there are links to shop with us online at PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu. Remember also to comment or to make any additional helpful hints for the beaders that also watch this video in addition to you. Remember, you can also subscribe to get regular updates from us here at Potomac Beads by pressing that little bell in the corner. As always, thanks so much for watching, and happy beading, everyone.